such an important thing.
It is.
It's really key.
It's
really key to Harper Egan. I don't know if you know Harper Egan.
No, I don't.
The whole production idea of Harper Egan.
I do know Harper Egan.
It's really interesting.
It is really, because it is.
And that notion of the people you see in the world of Oz are actually different versions of what you see in Kansas.
Yeah.
Great joy of Dublin. Nobody ever doubles in film.
No.
The only director who doubles in film is David Lynch. It's a really great thing. Sorry, that was off piece. You don't know about Dublin. But Dublin's fucking great. It all came from the Wizard of Oz. What else do you want to know? Hello.
Hey, I'm Abby. I'm also a second year. And I played...
What time have you guys got to go?
Never.
No.
I played Stephanie in Morning last year. And it was amazing.
Did you have fun?
Yeah, it was epic.
Oh, great.
And it unlocked whole new worlds for me as an actress.
New hobbies, killing and
Our question is like collective second year question.
Brilliant.
When you're writing, do you have like a clear image of how you want your characters to look? And do you have a big say in the casting process?
I often write specifically for actors. I mean, I most normally write specifically for actors. I say most normally. That's a terrible phrase to use. I guess I most happily write when I'm thinking specifically for actors. Write, and very often I don't get to cast the actors I'm writing for. But say Harper Egan was written for Leslie Sharp. That was really great. That she was able to play that. Seawall was written for Andrew Scott. So I don't know if you know Seawall, but he's so brilliant in it. But there were so many moments where I just was hearing his voice.
He was in Birdland as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was, but weirdly Birdland wasn't written for him. Birdland was written for Matt Smith.
Oh my God!
I knew Matt really well, and we kind of hung out together and stuff. But,
he was epic in it.
Andrew?
So I'm in third years, on behalf of them. I was asking if we were possible to record your voice.
Yeah, of course.
Wisdom.
It is very. Do you want to put it here?
Of course, Florian as well. Florian, this is your phone. Thank you very much.
Hello, Florian. I hope I'm very wise.
Doey's already filming. Doey's already going for it.
Okay, you do it down here.
Thank you very much.
See you later. I hope it doesn't. See you later, guys. Really nice to meet you. It's a very echoey room. I hope it picks up. We'll see. There could be really entertaining mishearings. No, so it was originally written for Matt.
Okay, wow.
And the whole, knowing Matt was in On the Shore of the Wide World, and knowing him for 10 years before writing it, and the kind of strange phenomenon of him becoming the Doctor, and going from an actor who not many people knew to becoming like the most famous person in England for a time, was a fascinating kind of study in watching how somebody, in my opinion, with real grace and gentleness and intelligence managed an explosion of celebrity that was quite extraordinary. And I became really fascinated by that, by what celebrity does to your sense of self. So I wrote that play for him, and he decided he didn't want to do it. The fucker, I hate him now.
He missed out.
But Andrew is just such an artist. It was a real honour to get him and work with him again. So that kind of addresses both your questions. I do have a really clear sense of what characters are like. But very often write specifically for actors. And Morning was kind of really specifically... Morning's a really complicated one because it was originally written... I don't know if you saw the film, Carghazy, that Matt Smith directed for Sky Arts Picture House. It's online somewhere illegally, I'm sure. If you it's Cargese. It was originally written about two boys killing a girl, Stephen and Carl, and we changed it quite late on. We'd written the draft when we changed it to be written for two girls killing a boy. And it really freed it as a play. But Matt made a film of two boys killing a girl, which is really interesting. But I'm trying to remember specifically with Morning if I would... Yeah, I was thinking of specific people because... but it's, it's not just kind of like fucking heavy name-dropping people like Leslie and Andrew and Matt. That was written for people from the Lyric Young Company in Hammersmith and actors from the not the Deutsche Schauspielhaus, the Basel Junggestheater in Basel. It was originally going to be a co-production between a youth theatre in Basel and the Lyric Young Company. And what happened, instead of it being the co-production, was Sean directed the original production at the Lyric, And then another director who's a friend of mine, Sebastian Nudling, directed the Basel Junggestheater in Basel, and they opened the two productions kind of in the same month. So it's two different productions with different casts. It was bloody ace, man. It was really fascinating. Just seeing how Sean and Sebastian responded very differently to the text. So that text is a text which is full of questions. You know, you read it and there's no stage directions. It's brutally kind of edited. So you just get shards of a play. You know, and there's a space for investigation. So it's rich for directors like Sean or Sebastian to really interrogate and make sense of what the hell was going on. Do I get a say in casting? For a world premiere, I'm normally involved in the casting process to a degree. But actually, I'm really shit at casting. I'm not very good at it. My range of actors is really thin, you know, in terms of reference points. I mainly only know the actors I've already worked with. So I basically end up just wanting to give jobs to my mates. which is fine, but a bit ridiculous. You know, when you're just kind of like, so this 65-year-old Italian woman, can Andrew Scott do it? He's really, he's great.
You probably could.
Yeah, probably could actually. But it's interesting because one of the things that I cherish about being a playwright is the fact that the process of reception of my work is mediated through other people's imaginations. So it's not like being a novelist. You know, if you write a novel, when you write a novel, when you read a novel, unless you're reading in translation, you're absolutely directly reading the words that the writer has carved out for you. When you go and see a play, you're seeing that play through the filter of the imagination of the director, and that filter first starts in casting, or normally casting and design carry on at about the same time. You know, through the actor, the filter of the actor, the filter of the set designer, the lighting designer, the sound designer. And I love that. I really deeply love that. You know, the possibility that collectively we can make more than we ever could individually. I think it's profound. I think it's profound. And I cherish the art of the actor as well. I'm not really vampiric in terms of wanting to suck the souls out of the artistic creativity out of young people. I just think acting is really fundamental to our sense of culture and our sense of self. It's really important, the work you do. It's really important. And have any of you read, there's an extraordinary best-selling kind of history book at the moment. It's called Sapiens. Have you read this book, Sapiens? It's fucking brilliant. You must all read it. Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens. Yuval Noah Harari is a historian at the University of Jerusalem. And he's written this book, Sapiens, and it's a history of the entire species Homo sapien for the last 120,000 years. It's an incredible thing. He makes a fascinating point in it. I don't know how many... Have you guys... I mean, I can't tell ages anymore. So have any of you kind of like done jobs in life? Yeah. Okay, cool. So quite often, you've not just gone straight from school. I have no idea how old any of you are. But it was quite a long time when I was tremendously anxious that the work, you know, my fucking life, you know, watching The Exorcist and coming to meet cool people in near Wandsworth Prison, in a mental asylum near Wandsworth Prison, or you know, going to, you know, hanging out with people like Matt and Andrew and Leslie. It's such a cushy life. I used to be a school teacher, and there was a long time when I thought, bloody hell, I've totally got away with it. This is ridiculous. It's like ridiculous. I never even get stressed in my job, really. But and I worried at times that my work was frivolous and irrelevant, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter culturally. You know, theatre's a marginal art form. So few people go to the theatre. You know, Curious Incident, The Dog in the Night Time, by a country mile, is the most successful play I've written. Yeah, about 1.1 million people have seen it, which sounds a lot, but actually, if you made a BBC One drama and 1.1 million people saw it, you'd be fucking sacked, actually. It's a marginal art form, the theatre. I went to there's a brilliant bookshop in New York called the Strand Bookstore in the East Village of New York. It's fucking great. It advertises itself as having miles and miles of books. Yeah, that's the slogan. Patti Smith used to work there, which always makes me very happy and betrays my age, because you divide this room, you kind of, Patti Smith used to work there, you go, wow, and kind of like, maybe a little bit of kind of, oh, yeah, Patti Smith, over from the postgraduate students, the rest of them is like, who the fuck is Patti Smith? Yeah, Patti Smith used to work there. I went there for the first time, and that's where the new play section was, and they showed me the new play section, and it was about that big. You know, amongst millions and millions of books, our art form is marginal and negligible, so sometimes I think it's not important. But what Harari says in Sapiens, he says the defining difference between Homo sapien and other hominids, Neanderthal man, Homo erectus, other primates, chimpanzee, baboon, whatever, the thing that distinguishes Homo sapien from other primates, from other animals, is the capacity to control crowds of more than 150 people. How do you control a crowd of 150 people or more to turn it into a village or a town or a city or a culture, which allows you then to nurture cultural development, to make art, to make science, to explore the world, to travel from Indonesia to Australia, to travel from the USA to the moon, to travel with that much imagination and that much energy? How do you do that? Well, the way you do that is you tell people stories. Yeah. And it's the process of telling stories that distinguishes and refines and defines us as an animal. Yeah. Subsequently, is fundamentally important what stories we tell to each other, because the stories that we tell to each other make us who we are. It's fundamentally important that you take that work very seriously, you are responsible for it. That when you're acting, you perform with a sense of integrity, because the performance you give will define your audience's sense of self. It directly, perceptibly changes the world. It's really important to take it seriously. It's why I think it's really important to come and speak to actors. Subsequent, what I was saying, that was not your question.
No.
What I was saying was I was cherishing the part of theatre making that is collaborative. The process of telling a story together is really collaborative, and I value the artistic imagination of the actors involved in that, and the designers involved in that, and the directors involved in that. So subsequently, when I get into a casting meeting, and Carrie Cracknell says to me, "So who do you think?" And I say, "I don't know, because there's a role for my mate in it." And she goes, "No, but there's this fucking brilliant Charlotte Randall or Danny or whatever." And then it's just like, all right, I'll trust you. I trust you more than I trust myself. I think if you're going to make theatre without that spirit of trust, then you just corrupt it. So trust becomes an integral and urgent part of the job for me.
Have you ever been very surprised by any productions of your plays?
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah.
Is that exciting?
Pretty much always.
Yeah.
Pretty much always. When it's a production that I'm working on, I find it very hard to distance myself from it.
Yeah.
And I think if you're going to make a production, if you're going to be involved in a production in any way as a writer, no lesser as a writer than as a director or as an actor, you necessarily fall in love with it a bit.
Yeah.
You know, it's like engaging in a relationship in some way. You've got to go there. You can't take an acting job and phone it in. That really poisons it. It really poisons it. So sometimes it takes me a year or 2 years to really assess the calibre of a production. Because when I'm in the rehearsal room with the company, it's just with a sense of real conviction that we're making something fucking brilliant. And if you don't have that conviction, and the role of the writer in the rehearsal room is to energise that room. What's more easy to assess objectively is productions that I go and see when I'm just going to see a production. I'd like go out for opening night and watch it on opening night. Yeah. Nearly always it's just been thrilling or fascinating. Sometimes it's disappointing, but rarely. There's only one time, there was a production, I only think of, whenever anybody asks me that question, I can only think of a production of Motortown that they fucked up, and that was annoying, because actually I met the director before they did it, and do you know that play? Yeah. So there's a play which ends up, the starting image of it was Danny having his hair cut. I said that to you. Yeah. It's really important for me that Danny ends that play in a position of vulnerability, and that the final action in that play is his brother perhaps suffering from some form of Asperger's, who has an awkward, kind of paralysed life, correcting his grammar. That's the final line in the play, is he corrects his grammar. And I always thought the gesture of correcting his grammar is actually him saying there are right things and wrong things. There is good and there is bad. We're not in a mess of moral relativism.
Yeah.
There are some things you can't do, and you can't use a double negative lazily, like I didn't do nothing.
Yeah.
That's lazy. And you also can't murder teenagers, so I am going to phone the police.
Yeah.
The final image of that was effectively Lee telling Danny that he's going to phone the police by correcting his grammar.
Right.
And in the German language premiere in Zurich, they switched it so it was Danny giving Lee a haircut. Because he was a position of power, he's the strong one, he's the soldier. And I kind of tried to persuade them that they were missing the whole point of the play. And they didn't listen to me, and they did it. And they missed the whole point of the play, and that was disappointing. But I got a night out in Zurich, so it's a great city. You know, I had a great time. We had a party, it was brilliant.
It's all right then.
I can still dance and drink with people who fuck my plays up, because life's more important. Right, I've no idea who to go to now. Maybe you should choose. I can let you be the editor.
Oh, okay. I saw Sarah.
Oh, hi, I'm Sarah.
Hello, Sarah.
I'm the second year with the rest of them, and I did Christopher last year from Curious.
Brilliant.
Gender.
Brilliant. Oh, great. I think that's really interesting. How did it
Yeah,
go?
a few of us did it, a few of the girls.
We
on
had
the
a
boys.
yeah, we did a production. We split the role up between
Great.
girls and boys.
I bet that's really fascinating.
It was
It
really
was fascinating.
I wish I'd seen it.
Ours is, again, a second year collective question. When an actor
I like the spirit in the second year. The postgraduates sitting there with their individual questions. Their reference to literary theory. Yeah, go on.
When an actor first approaches your text, what is the first thing you want them to consider? Obviously, other than reading the play.
Brilliant. Oh, that's a really smart question. That's the kind of question that only a group of people could have come up with. It's tricky reading plays, isn't it? It's a tricky thing to do. It's a slippery thing. It's not easy. You know, I always think reading plays is like reading recipes. I've said that before, you know, because in the process of reading a recipe, some people are very good at it. They can imagine the combination of flavours and imagine what a meal tastes like. Some people find it tremendously difficult. Try to read holistically. You know, try to remember you're not reading a novel, that it's not a novel. You know, it's not a novel where which you get to read out loud. That I think tremendously important in my plays is not what the characters are saying to one another, nor what the characters are thinking or feeling or remembering, but goes back to something I touched upon in answer to your question, but it's what the characters are doing to one another psychologically. I really was very inspired by Max Stafford Clark, the director Max Stafford Clark, who refined the Stanislavskian process of actioning in his direction. I'm sure you've kind of come across actioning in your work here, but as a writer, it's become really, really important to me. You know, it's the process of editing a play for me, is making sure that when I give a character dialogue, they're not just speaking or remembering or feeling, they're doing something with the line. So try and figure out what the action is. Try and figure out, make sure you read the whole fucking play, not just your bit. Because actually the characters don't exist in isolation from one another. The gesture of the play is the construction of a constellation of bodies on a stage in time. So, if you're going in to meet a director for a new play, the likelihood is the writer's there. Yeah? And it has definitely impressed me in the past when an actor has clearly interrogated the whole play and thought about what the play is for. You know, what is that play for? It's a really interesting question. It's not what are you trying to, isn't what is the writer trying to say with the play, but what's the writer trying to do with the play? What the fuck is the play for? If you can interrogate that and make sense of what the play is doing to you, and then within the construct of that, make sense of what your character is doing to the other people around them, what they want, what's stopping them from getting what they want, and what they do to get what they want. You know, that's the kind of thing that if I was in that audition, I would be pestering Carrie Cracknell or Sean Holmes and saying, just give it them. I don't care about anything else. They're really clever. And it's really valuable, and it will make you a better actor. I think they're really good things. Read the whole play. Make sure you know what the play is for. Make sure you know what your character wants, what's stopping them from getting what they want, and what they do in order to get it. Because for me, that's the engine of performing my plays. I think.
Thank you.
I think not at all.
Joe.
Before you wrote the court, came into my high school.
Did I?
Yeah.
Where was that?
Well,
Fuck off! That was my high school. Did we meet then? We talked a lot about sex and drugs. Jesus, man! Right, you can all fuck off. How have you got so old, Joe? You were Mr. Webster. Yeah, that's right. I just had an email from Wayne McGregor as well. You know Wayne McGregor, the choreographer Wayne McGregor? Any of you interested in contemporary choreography?
Yeah, like choreography.
Yeah, like the most significant living choreographer, perhaps. Certainly English. Yeah, he used to go to Ireland as well. He's doing pretty well. You've got a lot to There's only two of us who've ever come out of that school and worked in the performing arts. Me and Wayne, and now you're the third, Joe. So that's really mad. And then we met at Port. You can She was great. Is she still there? Is she still there though? Yeah. Brilliant. Sorry. Yeah.
I was just wondering, did you ever find a character from those? Because we had.
I can't. I'd be lying if I said remember really specifically. But yeah, you must have had the experience of going to see the play and you found I said something like that, or I did that.
It was like literally before it came out,
I'm sure this is what I said to you when you asked me about the process. And this is what, the vicar who I go and interview tomorrow, in 18 months' time, he'll come and see my play and he'll be like, I said that! Yeah, definitely, I definitely did. I'm sure I can't remember specifically, but I definitely would have done. And also there were other people that wasn't for Port, that was for punk rock. That was for punk rock, because punk rock was about school kids. It was, and definitely then it would have been, I can remember that much more, because that was 2008. So how old were you, when were you 13, 14? Yeah, so that was punk rock. So Port was written in 2001, or 2000, 2001, you weren't born then. No, but definitely it's really important to me. It's really energising to go and meet people, and you never tell a writer anything. Be really careful in what you say to me in the next hour, because I'll have it, I'll have it. I just need it. And part of the fantastic short story writer and poet, American short story writer and poet called Raymond Carver. And, I'll always say this at this point, you'll remember nothing about what I say to you today, actually, probably, or very little. And you'll kind of go back to your housemates or whatever, or your friends, and say, what did you do at college today? And you say, oh, Simon Stevens came in. And they say, what, the disgraced head of the National Health Service? No, that was a joke that died in this audience, isn't it? Fucking hell, brilliant. What did he have to say to you? And you won't remember a word I say. Within a few hours, you won't remember anything. You'll remember the physical gestures, because that's what theatre is for. It's gestural. We remember image. You remember how I sat in the chair and that I hit myself weirdly, or kind of pulled my hair, or the way I drank my tea. You remember that. You won't remember the content of my speech. I hope you remember Raymond Carver. So write down Raymond Carver. If I give you nothing else, I'll leave you with that name. It's a fucking gift. A great, great writer. He said the most beautiful thing about writing. He said you don't need to be an intellectual to be a writer. You don't even need to be the cleverest kid in your class or the cleverest kid in your street. All you need is the capacity to stand and stare, open-mouthed in wonder at the world. And I think that's what writers do, and that's what I try and do, and it's hard. So in order to sustain that work, I need to go and find it. If I just spent my day at my desk, I'd lose the sense of wonder. But when I go back to my old school, and I meet kids in my old school, and I talk to them about their lives, it leaves you with a sense of awe. I left those meetings with a sense of awe and gratitude. You know, and for Joe Stone, and for Mr. Webster, and Mr. Mail, who wrote to me last week, is Mr. Harbour. You won't remember. Chandler, are they still there? Unfucking believable. They were so brilliant. They were so brilliant. These are 3 PE teachers who were the PE teachers when I was there and were still the PE teachers. And they hadn't aged, they changed. They looked really jolly in their shorts. They were brilliant. So you leave that experience with a sense of awe and a sense of wonder, and so necessarily, of course you nick it. Of course you nick it, definitely. I hope I didn't offend anybody with that, or that they weren't surprised. But it gives them a bit of immortality. Yeah. Man, really nice to see you, Joe.
Next person, yours. Yes?
Hi, I'm Rosemary. I actually met you a few months ago at the National.
You weren't at my old school, were you?
But when I spoke to you, you told me that drama was found in the counterpoint. So I just wondered...
Where did we meet at the National? What?
It was the interval of light shining in the future.
Oh man! Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I can imagine why I was talking about counterpoint then, in that sense.
Yeah, so I was wondering whether when an actor approaches your text, do you think that they should look at it from an opposite point of view? Or do you ever want them to perform it as written, if you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
That's a really interesting question. I did talk about that, and I do think it's true that theatre exists, or drama exists, in the counterpointed space between different elements. What's interesting about that is, for me, the counterpoint, and I'm thinking specifically about Light Shining on Buckinghamshire, what worried me about that play, and look, I would walk over fire for Carol Churchill. I think she's like the most important living playwright, and she genuinely fills me with awe, and I revere her, and also she's lovely. But I didn't think that play worked for me, and it didn't work for me because it lacked a counterpoint between the idea and the text, and it was like she had something that she wanted to say. So what she did was she wrote down what she wanted to say, and so there was no space for interpretation. I wasn't left in a position as an audience member where I was going, what's going on here? What are they doing? It felt like a lecture, like a staged lecture, yeah? And for me, theatre's most exciting when there are problems or there are counterpoints or people are saying things and what they say sits at odds with what they do. I often talk about that. I often talk about the importance, in an acting point of view, of a counterpoint between psychological action and language. And I'll come back to that, but answer your original question. There's part of it thinks that the artist responsible for establishing the counterpoint are the playwright and the director and perhaps the designer. But in the way that, to contradict my answer to your question, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I do think it's important for an actor to have an understanding of the gesture of the play and the constellation of the play. But that's at the point of audition. Fundamentally, when you're working on a play, you know, you have to just be responsible for your bit. You know, in a way, you've just got to. It's like it's really. I had this thought earlier. You know, we all live our lives assuming that we're at the centre of the story of the world. Yeah, maybe we don't. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it might actually just be me. It might be a very gendered thing, or it might just be a personal thing. But I think to a degree, it's true that we assume ourselves to be at the centre of the story of the world. Yeah, and we're just not. And it's a complicated thing to get your head around that. And quite often an actor in rehearsal of a play, you know, the only way you can rehearse a play is assume that that play is about your character. You know, that's how you do it. Even if your character's on for half a page. You know, like Lucy in Punk Rock. I don't know if you know Punk Rock. There's that moment, the little girl comes in and all she has one line, which is, Mum says you've got to hurry up. Yeah? You know, the actor playing Lucy, you've got to commit as though that is Lucy's play. You know? So there's part of me that thinks you don't need to worry about counterpoint. Let other people worry about that. What's interesting for me is to be alert to, from a performer's point of view, is the contrapuntal relationship between language and action. And if you've done a lot of actioning in class, you'll be alert to this. The idea that what a character is doing to another character is not necessarily the same as what they're saying to another character. That humans have the capacity to lie, or to inveigle, or to distract, or to confuse deliberately. Yeah? I remember illustrating this point in a workshop in Mexico City to a group of Mexican playwrights, Latin American playwrights. And I said to them, you know that thing where you really fancy somebody? And so in order to make it clear how much you fancy them, you might kind of like just be a little bit rude to them or whatever, or kind of like ignore them. And the whole room looked at me like, what the fuck are you talking about? That is not how you seduce somebody in Mexico City. Is that how people seduce each other in London? You are fucked up, man. But I think there are other examples as well where what people do to one another is different to what they say to one another. And for me, Carol in that play, I think perhaps led by Max, failed to establish a counterpoint between language and action. So it felt like characters were just saying what they thought and actually what the playwright had researched. And I love theatre. Like, I'm mental about it. And I did find myself falling asleep in it. And I was like, oh, that's awful. I was sitting behind Wallace Shawn and near Stephen Daldry and near Benedict Cumberbatch, and I fucking fell asleep.
Did you do that too?
I don't think either of them spot me, but it was really, you know, it was embarrassing. But she's a fucking great artist, so I don't know what she thinks about that play.
Next question, yes?
When you wrote You Adapted Curious Incident, did you make any decisions about it to become such a physical piece of theatre, all the design concepts, or were you part of that process? How did that happen?
I think it's fair to say that it was central to my thinking from the very beginning. You know, the way I wrote that play, and I've been very public about being on record about this play, was that it was written very privately. Like, Mark asked me to write it, and I didn't tell anybody. I just kept it to myself and wrote it as an exercise to see if I could do it for him, partly because partly to try the process of adaptation, and partly because I like him, and I wanted to, you know, he asked me to do it, and it was really flattering. And also I quite like the idea of making a piece of theatre that my children could come and see. Because, you know, normally I just write plays about people murdering each other, and I don't want, you know, my daughter's 8, I don't want her to see the Three Kingdoms. Really, that'd be terrible. But those things aside, at the start of that year, Stephen Hoggett and Scott Graham, which was 2008 I wrote it, Stephen and Scott had asked to meet me because they wanted to work with me on something. So they kind of placed the formless hunch of working with Frantic Assembly somewhere in the back of my head. So it was kind of in the soup of my creative thinking, was the possibility of working with Frantic Assembly. So when I got to that, to writing the adaptation, it was a possibility. And, you know, the biggest challenge for me in that play, Mark said to me the biggest challenge would be getting an interior voice articulated by somebody who would never speak to strangers. I cracked that pretty quickly. The hardest thing was getting somebody from Swindon to Willesden on stage. And I was sitting thinking, how the hell do you get somebody from Swindon to Willesden on stage? And then I thought, I'll just get fucking Stephen and Scott to do it. So what? The consequence of the text was, if you read the text, there's no stage directions. And all there is, when you go to Swindon Station, is the series of voices. You know, and there's a potential production of Curious Incident where all you do is you just have to say those words, and that might be really beautiful, could work really well. But there's space there for a physical interpretation. It's very lazy. But intelligence and laziness are not necessarily mutually exclusive.
It's magical watching the journey and this train set appearing.
The train set was in from the beginning, and the train set was my idea. That was definitely my idea. If you read the first drafts of that play, the train set is in there, and it's I wonder how much of it was in Mark's thinking, because I think he's the real intelligence. You know, I just typed it out and put the character names on the left, but I think he's got, you know, he's got a ferocious mind. It's really fascinating. There's that moment in the letters when she talks about how he had a train set. I remember realising, and also, you know, what did you do at school today? Oh, we did money, and we did money, and I don't think it's money and money and public transport. There's a moment where, yeah, you could remember that, like money and public transport, and that's just taken from the novel. And it was like, Jesus, Mark, you knew, at this stage of the novel, you knew Christopher was going to need to know how to use money and how to use public transport. So I think he's got the great controlling intelligence in that story, that every element led towards that moment of the train track going out, I think. Or we did it together, you know. You're shaking your head really beautifully, it's really moving.
I've seen it twice and I just think it's probably one of the best things I've ever seen. It's just incredible.
Thank you, that's really generous of you to say. People often get nervous about complimenting me. That sounds terrible to say. You can never compliment writers. If you ever meet a writer and you like their stuff, never be shy about telling them how much you like their work.
I saw pornography as well.
Yeah.
I sat there watching the man strip off and I still don't know why he did it. So.
Yeah. He was about to go and have sex with somebody.
It didn't come across.
It just helps. No, it's interesting. I mean, we talk about nudity on stage, and also anecdotally we can talk about that moment, which is really funny. It's really funny. It's a really funny story. I'm nervous about the recording. We were doing it. We were. Oh, bless Sam Sproul. We were rehearsing it in Birmingham, and it was the tech rehearsal or the dress rehearsal, and just figuring out how to do that moment just before his sister leaves the room, and he knows that he's going to go and have sex with his sister. So, which is wrong, isn't it? I mean, that's not. It's not good. I've got 3 children myself, 2 brothers, and I'd have to say, if I give one word of advice to my children, it would definitely be: whatever you do, don't have sex with each other. No, he wouldn't. I mean, I would say that, but I'd say other things as well. He was watching his sister leave the room, and Sean, who was directing it, got up from his seat and just went up to him while he was on stage and whispered in his ear and whispered, "Take your shoes off." Okay, so he took his shoes off, and then he carried on and took his clothes off, and he'd misheard the director, and the director had said to him, "Take your shoes off." And he thought he'd said, "Take your clothes off." So he just did. But as it happened, we were sitting and watching it, and for me, nudity on stage is I don't find it embarrassing or distracting or erotic. For me, nudity on stage always speaks of vulnerability. And when I see an actor naked on stage, I just think it's heartbreaking because they're just so, literally naked, and the literal nakedness reveals the metaphorical nakedness. And I just thought that character at that point, he's cut his skin open, and he's there, and I just thought it was a beautiful metaphor for what he was going through emotionally.
I'm glad I get it now.
And thank you for being so generous about Curious, though, because we normally operate in a position of thinking that what we do is shit, actually. Most of the time I just think that my plays are a bit rubbish. So whenever anybody meets me and tells me that, thank you. It's a Big relief.
Giselle?
Did you? At the lyric? Yeah. It's all about Joe, really. That whole play is about Joe. Really, really good question. I kind of, it's instinctive. It was an intuitive thing. It was really instinctive. Instinctively, I thought he shouldn't kill Tanya because I liked the idea of him hugging her and saying, "You're really lovely." And I liked the idea that he had a notion of justice and injustice. But in the very first draft, he did kill Chadwick, and it was a kind of painful thing for him. But he felt let down by Chadwick earlier on. You know, the German language premiere of punk rock, he killed everybody. And I remember thinking, that's a mistake. It's not a play about a school shooting. He doesn't operate like a school shooter, William. He doesn't go into the reception and kill the receptionist and then walk down the corridor and kill everybody. It's a play about love, actually. It's a love story. It's a play about a crime de corps, a crime of the heart, a crime of passion. And there's an element of why he might want to kill Chadwick because he feels betrayed. But it's really interesting. Sarah Franken, who directed it, has got an extraordinary and brilliant and mathematical brain. And when we did the first reading of it, she kind of said to me, "Why does he kill Chadwick? What's the killing of Chadwick about?" And I talked about that. And she goes back. She went back to the very first scene. And the first thing that Bennett says, I don't know if you know this play, there's a character called Bennett who comes in, and this is based on the experience of going on a bus to Mile End. And he says, on the bus on his way to school, this kid had told somebody that if anybody smoked, he was stopping smoking, if anybody smoked on that bus, he was going to batter them. And when that's something that somebody said when I was in year 7 on a bus, and I remember it, really vividly remember this kid saying, anybody smokes on this top deck, they're getting battered, because I've stopped smoking. And so Bennett picks out 3 cigarettes and lights them and smokes them all at once, and 3 cigarettes between his fingers. And it was a playful image. But Sarah landed on it, and she's like, those 3 cigarettes, that's really interesting. Are you sure he shouldn't just kill 3 people to pay off the image of the 3 cigarettes from the first scene? And I thought that was such an exciting literary idea that then I decided to save Chadwick. And I like the idea of Chadwick getting away, and then William saying, he got away, and then turning and killing Nicholas. That was really good fun. And then that's why Richard, the doctor, brings 3 cigarettes in. It's all paying off those ideas. Yeah, I think you know, murder's always irrational, isn't it? In a way. It's hard to, I suspect because she overly had identified herself as being defined by Bennett, and he felt that worthy of punishment, I think. Poor sod. Yeah.
Yes?
Hi, I'm Dewi. I played Siobhan in Curious, and that was loads of fun.
Oh, brilliant.
It was. I'm going to ask a kind of controversial question.
Go on.
Because it's one that I'm asked all the time, and I wanted to know your opinion.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of been said that obviously it's a really interesting time for theatre, but it's kind of been going about that theatre's this dying trade.
Has it?
I literally most days get asked about my friends. I have horrible friends. You have no career. Basically what they're saying. I just want to know what your thoughts so far.
I don't think that's that controversial a question at all. I think people have been saying that for years and years and years, and yet it still seems to be here. Mm. You know, people said it about theatre when, you know, the fucking novel was invented. That it would result in, you know, the novel is a comparatively recent art form, isn't it? It's kind of the middle of the 18th century. start of the 19th century was the real time of the burgeoning of the novel, and people were certain that theatre would die as a consequence, and definitely when cinema was invented at the start of the 20th century, that it would inevitably result in the death of theatre. And now that we're so connected via our tablets and our telephones and our computers, and there's always been this kind of notion that theatre would render itself obsolete. For me, I am fairly confident that an art form that survived 2,500 years is not going to be knocked off its perch by Facebook. That's the conservative kind of austere part of me. But do you know what? The more exciting part of me is actually, I've never been more energised by theatre. I think it's more radical now than it's ever been. And it's become radical by not changing. It's really, really weird. When I started off, all my mates when I started off were just like, right, when are you going to write a film? Because nobody really gives a shit about theatre. Theatre's are dying, and it's full of posh people. And posh people kind of like watching stories about poor people. I mean, it's really fucked up, and you should just make some films. Nowadays, I think there's a sense of excitement about theatre, because just for the simple dint of the fact that it's the one room where you kind of have to turn your phone off. And if you don't turn your phone off, a room full of strangers notices you haven't and hates you for it. And we've all had the experience, or I don't think I have left, my wife certainly. We went to the press night of Jerusalem in the West End, which starts off with an angelic teenage girl singing William Blake's Jerusalem hymn. And my wife's phone went off at that moment on the opening night in the West End. And it was a new phone, she didn't know how to turn it off. So that's pretty mortifying. I'm not judging these people in the way that people get judgy, but there's something beautiful about the fact that in this room, you turn your phones off. And you sit next to somebody you've never met before, and you look in the same direction as a stranger, and you engage in the same story as this stranger, and you affect one another's reception of it. So I've definitely had the experience of sitting next to somebody in a theatre who was legibly bored, and I kind of ended up having to sit like that because their spirit affects you, but also being in the theatre with strangers who are energised and astonished, and that's infectious as well. And we can offer this to each other. I'm a very secular thinker. I'm a very scientific thinker. I've never really been to church apart from friends' weddings or funerals, and very beautiful buildings. And it's a beautiful building. This is a beautiful space. But I think as a culture we suffer perhaps from the absence of a shared experience, the shared experience of church going, because religion is such a complicated cultural phenomena. The one space I get that is when I go to the theatre and I sit next to people I've never sat before, and we are sharing an experience that is happening live on stage, and we're in the same room as those people. It's such a beautiful space with which to engage in the astonishing things that human beings are capable of. Because when you watch a great acting performance, you engage in the story and you're moved by the story, or you're moved by the writing, you're moved by the language, but fundamentally, you watch it and go, fucking look at that, that's amazing. How did they do that? The great, watching Hangmen the other week at the Royal Court, and it wasn't, for me, it wasn't David Morrissey so much, who I like a lot, but Johnny Flynn. Yeah. Watching it, I don't know if you've seen that play, but Johnny Flynn in that play was fucking brilliant. And you watch it thinking, I'm in the same room as that boy being fucking brilliant.
But you know what? That boy can only be fucking brilliant because he's got a good play.
No, I agree with you. I agree. No, I really agree with you. But the play in itself is not the same experience because you're just reading it. So it's a synthesis of different elements. But going back to your question, I've never felt more energised about theatre than I feel now. I think it's really radical. I think it's really sexy. I think there are great people making it. And it's a marginal art form, it is, I've said that already. But that's great, because the bigger the art form gets, the kind of more diluted the gesture of making the art becomes, and the more defined by convention it becomes. And I've met television producers and I've met film producers, and fundamentally they want a retelling of the same convention. You never get that in theatre. I've had so many meetings with TV producers in which they tell me how TV is meant to be, what the defining conventions are meant to do, what you're meant to do when you write a TV script. I never, ever, ever have that in theatre, ever. And it's in theatre that we can more viscerally and passionately reimagine the stories that we tell each other. It's really urgent. But, that's all right, it's marginal, it's fine. I grew up in the 80s when fucking everybody thought the Eurythmics were better than the Smiths. most people thought that Dire Straits were better than the Smiths. They were wrong. I was right. Kind of 30 years later, nobody's listening to fucking Brothers in Arms anymore, but everybody's listening to the Smiths. Oh,
I still kind of like it.
that's all right.
Do you think?
But Dire Straits really good.
No.
He was the nicest, when I was a bar manager, Mark Knopfler was the biggest tipper who ever came into the bar, yeah. So we really liked him. Yeah,
no, I just wonder what there's a lot of live streaming of theatre happening now in the cinema. Do you think that's going to change things? Is that interesting?
I think it's too soon to tell. I don't think it will ever replace it.
No, I don't think we'll either.
So in that sense, I don't think it necessarily will. It might get the hunger for live performance.
Yeah.
It might energise it. I think it's too soon to tell. It was really weird watching Curious at NT Live.
Was it?
Yeah. Watching that in a cinema in outside Cologne.
Wow.
In a suburb of Cologne. I sat in the cinema and watched Luke Treadaway. That was really weird, man. That was really weird. But if I don't know how live streaming is going to affect it. I don't know. And then there's other really interesting stuff like Forced Entertainment's live streaming, where the process of watching it on a computer is as fundamental as the process of being in the theatre.
Yeah,
I don't think it'll replace it.
I don't think we'll either. Who's next?
The second years have got a lot of questions.
I'm just saying,
if I were to judge you as a college, the second years win.
Yeah.
I have to say, maybe because the second years, all of them have done one of your plays.
Oh, really?
And your plays we did.
Well, then they're being surprisingly tolerant.
Yes, they are.
So they win. Second years lose. No, go on, yeah. All right. Anything else?
Go, Amber.
What's the, because you're saying like you've been approached by TV directors and stuff.
Yeah.
Would you say the difference of writing plays for theatre and the TV? Because I don't know whether you've watched recently the playwright Mike Bartlett just wrote the Dr. Foster. And it was
I've not watched it.
incredible.
Was it?
Yeah. Oh, you've got to watch it. It's amazing.
I'm sure. Well, I won't. I'm sure it is because he's really brilliant. Mike's really brilliant.
So what would you say? And do you much prefer writing?
Yeah, you should really talk to Mike about it, or Jack Thorne, who's a fucking brilliant playwright and TV writer, or Dennis Kelly, who's a great playwright and TV writer. They'd have much more interesting answers to this question than me. I mainly watch Match of the Days, the only television. I watch a lot of Modern Family with my kids. It's quite good. But I don't really watch.
Do you much prefer just writing? Is that just you just want to write for theatre?
Yeah, I'm really weird. I just love the theatre. It gets me really excited. I was commissioned recently. This is probably really naughty, but it's possibly not as naughty as telling people that Sam Spruill got naked accidentally. I was going to make a film for the brilliant filmmaker Paul Greengrass, produced by Scott Rudin, who's like the most important living film producer. And I pulled out of it because I wanted to make a bit of theatre with Frantic Assembly instead. It's just like so stupid. So stupid. It would have like paid off my mortgage. And I just wanted to do this bit of theatre that nobody's going to see. Just because I think that liveness is really fundamental. And I'm not... Mike is a great writer. Dennis is a great writer. Jack is a great writer. Scott Rudin is a great film producer. Paul Greengrass is a great film director. It's just, I would be lying if I didn't say that the thing that I want to make work that gets me up in the morning. The idea of going to work and just getting excited about what I'm going to do there. That's what I want. I'm in the privileged position that that's what I can do now. I can go to work and just make stuff that gets me excited. And whenever I think about writing for television, I think about the deadening hand of television executives and their fetid lack of imagination. And it makes me despair. And I'd much rather be in a room with Scott Graham, kicking things around that might not work, than in a room with the BBC head of drama telling me that something that I think is beautiful is actually not conventional enough. But, you know, that's just me.
Ben?
As someone who's passionate about stories, do you have a favourite childhood series that you read, or a favourite childhood book?
That's so brilliant. I remember, I don't know if you remember, Joe, or if you read, there's an extraordinary series of stories called The Weird Stone of Brisingamen, written by a writer called Alan Garner. It's quite kind of like, not many people have heard about it. It's a big Stockport writer, though, and it's all set on Alderley Edge. And he wrote these stories about Alderley Edge, and I used to read those and used to love those. Used to enjoy reading kind of kids' novels about amateur football players. I used to really love those. But actually, more recently, I've fallen in love with stories that I've read to my kids. So I started off reading J.K. Rowling and thinking she was shit. Because I'd read Roald Dahl, and you read Roald Dahl, and you read A.A. Milne, and then you go into reading J.K. Rowling, and just linguistically, she's not as good. But actually, we've had Harry Potter on Talking Book in our household for about 10 years now. And I've read all of those novels 3 times out loud. I've never done that with any other story, and I think it's an extraordinary achievement. I love reading kids' picture books. As a writer, it's really great, because you learn so much about how narrative works from kids' picture books, that everything comes in 3s. You know, you read Maurice Sendak. If you want to learn about how narrative works, just read the stories of Maurice Sendak, The Night Kitchen, Where the Wild Things Are. You know, those 2 things, that's as sophisticated storytelling as you'll ever get. It's absolutely beautiful. And the joy about having children, there's lots of joys about having children, there's lots of shit stuff about having children. One of the joys about having children is if you get a good book that you know you're going to read out loud 100 times. And when it's as good as In the Night Kitchen or Where the Wild Things Are, I can happily read those books out loud 100 times because I learn from them as a storyteller. Yeah.
Last question. Yep.
No, I didn't mean to go yes. I didn't mean to go yes as in thank fuck. So much as like, yeah, come on, it's been a long time. And it's hot over here. These poor people.
Sorry, we went to go see Songs from Far Away when it was on at the
Oh,
event.
yeah. Talk about on-stage nudity.
Yeah.
These remarkable testicles, weren't they huge?
Well, other than like the penis and stuff, it was like truthfully like beautiful about grief and how it can be selfish and that's okay.
And actually, I think there's something beautiful about his body, actually. I thought he looked really beautiful. I thought he was lit, really. It's like a Rodin sculpture.
Yeah, I didn't feel awkward watching that. I thought it was a really
either.
like beautiful sentiment on stage.
Yeah.
But my question was going to be like, what started that whole play? Like, what was the spark that started that?
Yeah.
It was written for Ivo van Hove, who's the artistic director of Toneel Group Amsterdam, who's become more famous in England because of his production of View from the Bridge, but is a brilliant, brilliant theatre director who's been working for 20 years in New York and Amsterdam. I worked with Toneel Group Amsterdam on the original world premiere of my play, The Trial of Ubu, and he never does new plays. Ivo never does new plays. So he does Arthur Miller, he does Tennessee Williams, he does Eugene O'Neill, he does Shakespeare, his Roman tragedies. If you ever get the chance to see Ivo van Hove's work, just go and see it. He did Roman Tragedies, which was a 5-hour show, 5.5 hours. It was Coriolanus, Julius Caesar, and Antony and Cleopatra, one after the other, without an interval.
Wow.
Cool. And was, I think, the best theatre I've ever seen. It was utterly astonishing, exciting, compelling, dramatic. They kept the theatre doors open so you could leave at any point and go to the toilet or go for a cigarette or go and have a sandwich or have a beer and then come back in. It was fucking brilliant. I really wanted to work with him, and after Trial of Ubu and doing a reading of Wastwater in Amsterdam, he kind of said, you know, we've been flirting with each other for a long time, maybe we should work together. And he asked me to write a monologue, and he asked me to write a monologue for Eelco. Eelco is in his company. It's a really beautiful thing for an actor to be in somebody's company. It's a great privilege. I mean, it's a really gorgeous performance and really hard to get in Britain. You know, there's not really companies in the way that there is in Europe. He loved Eelco and he wanted me to write for Eelco. He was a fan of Mark Eitzel, who's the songwriter who wrote the song, who was a hero of mine when I was a kid. And he was quite excited by the idea of me writing with Mark again. And we got quite excited by the idea of a one-man musical. So there'd be a kind of like story about one guy, and he would be the only one who would sing. And I guess he'd made a production of Cocteau's La Voix Humaine, The Human Voice, which is a monologue in which a woman is on the telephone constantly throughout. It's a beautiful piece of writing. It's very hard to get a good English translation of it, but it's great play. And he liked the idea of me writing a response piece to that. I didn't really want to do a telephone, and the obvious kind of contemporary thing would be to do email, and have a character sending a series of emails. But I guess, because it was such an obvious thing to write emails, I wanted to do the opposite. And kind of spending a lot of time in hotels, you know, the one thing you're always given in hotels is notepaper. And I was really fascinated by the weirdness of still leaving notepapers and Bibles in hotel rooms. And became really fascinated by that. And went with Mark to Amsterdam. And we spent a week interviewing people, going around, hanging out. Mark, on the first night we got there, he went out to the gay bar Vars in Amsterdam. I went to bed and he went out to this gay bar where he met the Brazilian guy who almost kind of line by line. All that speech is just things, I've got it on my phone, him saying, I met this guy at the bar last night. He just told me, why are people always throwing babies in dumpsters? They're always, you know. So the play was crystallized from our experience in Amsterdam, just meeting all these people, and the notion that it would be a response to the human voice, that it'd be letters because you only write letters in hotels. And then I like the idea of writing about somebody returning home. Because it's all I do, you know. It's a big myth. It's a big myth that I've written, I don't know, I genuinely lost count, I think 23 or 24 plays. It's a mythical idea that a writer faced with the gesture of writing a new play has to write something write something new, write something fresh. It isn't how it works. What we do as writers, if we're good, is or the writers I cherish, the writers I adore, return to the same questions obsessively, and they return as an attempt to answer those questions obsessively. And if you read Chekhov, he's writing about the same things again and again. Sarah Kane writes about the same things again and again. Really great writers like that. It's a really lovely piece by Oliver Sacks, the psychotherapist Oliver Sacks. Talks about the relationship between creativity and nostalgia in his book, The Anthropologist on Mars. I'm going to finish with this story. He talks about a patient he had. Oliver Sacks has written, he died last year. He writes these extraordinary books, which are books of case studies of the patients he's worked with. And he worked with this person who was living in Florida in the 80s and was suffering from paralyzing nostalgia. He was born and raised in Florence or outside Florence in the 50s and moved to Florida in the 80s, but had such an acute nostalgia for his hometown that when he left his apartment in Florida, he couldn't see it. His nostalgia was so powerful that it affected what he saw. See, he saw his hometown of Florence. And subsequently, it was dangerous for him to leave the apartment because he could be walking to the middle of the highway and not notice, because in his head he's in a little picturesque square in kind of 1950s Florence. So he never left his apartment. But what he could do was he could make oil paintings, and he was quite a good oil painter. And he made these beautiful oil paintings of 1950s Florence. And living in Florida in the 80s, there was quite a lot of money kicking around for oil paintings of little Italian villages. So he made loads of money and exhibited his paintings, but never left his apartment. It's kind of a really sad life. And Sacks was writing about him, treated him and cured him. But he said that, nostalgia and creativity come from the same part of the human engine, the same part of our mind, the same part of our brain. We're not nostalgic about every experience we have. You're not going to be nostalgic about coming to college this morning. You're not going to be nostalgic about everything you've ever done. The experiences that you're nostalgic about are those experiences that were interrupted and are incomplete. The relationships which ended badly, the parents who died too young, you know, the people we never see anymore, the places we never go to anymore. That's what leads us to be nostalgic. Interruption and the incompletion and the impulse to complete the interruption or repair the damage leads us to be nostalgic and leads us to create and leads us to write and to return obsessively to the same ideas. It's fundamental. It's what we do as humans. And it's dignified and it dignifies us. Good luck with that as you pursue your careers. Pursue them with truth and pursue them with clarity. And I very, very much look forward to working with you in a rehearsal room one day. and if I do work with you in a rehearsal room one day and I'll say, this play's fucking brilliant, don't say, I remember when you came to ALRA and you said you always say that and then years later you... I'm really glad you want to work in theatre. I think it dignifies all of us and I wish you great luck on that adventure. It's a real, real pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Because we've no way of leaving without...
We honestly, we all thank you, and everybody was very, very excited because actually, you know, people don't say they don't like your plays. Or we've all worked on your plays, and we really love your plays.
Yeah. Thank you.
We really do. We really do.
It's great. I'm really happy. I'm really happy.
Even though I dissed them